Clara shifted little Emma on her hip, the child's fevered forehead burning against her neck. 3-year-old Samuel clung to her tattered skirts, his small fingers white-knuckled around the fabric. The train car swayed violently, throwing passengers against one another, but Clara held firm. She'd learned to brace herself against worse storms than this. The rhythmic clacking of wheels on tracks had become a lullaby of sorts, though sleep was a luxury she couldn't afford. Not with 2 hungry children and only 3 coins left in her purse. Coins she'd counted so many times she knew every nick and scratch on their worn surfaces. "Mama, I'm thirsty," Samuel whispered, his voice barely audible above the train's roar. "Soon, my love, soon." The lie came easily now. She'd told so many these past weeks. The water barrel at the end of the car might as well have been a continent away. She'd tried twice already, only to be shouldered aside by paying passengers who looked at her patched dress and shoeless children with undisguised contempt. A woman across the aisle unwrapped a sandwich, the smell of fresh bread and meat making Samuel whimper. Clara pulled him closer, turning his face into her skirts. "Remember the story about the brave knight?" she murmured. He was hungry too, but he kept going because he knew. Because he knew the castle was waiting. Samuel finished, the words muffled against her leg. The castle. That's what she told them, that a castle waited at the end of this journey. Not a man named Elias Hawthorne who'd answered her advertisement with 3 terse lines. "Need a woman who can cook and keep house, 2 children acceptable if quiet. Will provide shelter and food." She'd memorized those words, turned them over in her mind like prayer beads. Shelter and food. For her babies. She'd do anything, be anything. The train lurched, and Clara's mind drifted backward, as it often did during these long hours. She could still see Thomas's face, twisted with drink and rage, still feel the sting of his fist, the crack of her ribs against the kitchen table. The neighbors had whispered when they found him dead in that jail cell, choked on his own vomit after a bar fight. They whispered louder when she sold everything, the house, his tools, her wedding ring, and it still wasn't enough to cover his debts. "Ticket, ma'am?" Clara startled. The conductor stood before her, hand outstretched. She'd shown her ticket 4 times already, but each time he asked as if he'd never seen her before, as if poverty made her invisible. She fumbled for the worn paper, careful not to jostle Emma too much. The conductor examined it with theatrical scrutiny before handing it back with a grunt. His eyes lingered on her children, on their hollow cheeks and 2 bright eyes. "Water station coming up in Millbrook," he said, not unkindly. "Might find someone charitable there." Charity. The word sat bitter on her tongue. She'd taken enough charity to last a lifetime, had begged for it, prayed for it, sold pieces of her soul for it. This wasn't charity. This was a business arrangement. She could cook. Lord knew she could clean. And her children. They'd learn to be quiet. They'd already learned so much. The promised water station came and went. Clara didn't move. She'd learned that leaving her seat meant risking losing it, and standing with 2 children for the remaining hours would be unbearable. Instead, she tore a strip from her petticoat, one of the few intact undergarments she still owned, and dabbed it with her own saliva to cool Emma's forehead. Hours bled into one another. The landscape outside shifted from green hills to brown plains to something that looked like the edge of the world itself. Flat, endless, broken only by the occasional cluster of buildings that passed for towns out here. Last stop, Perdition Creek. The name alone sent a shiver through her. Perdition. Her mother would have called it a sign, would have clutched her rosary and muttered prayers. But her mother had never been widowed at 23, never held her babies while they cried from hunger. Clara gathered their meager belongings, 1 carpet bag with 2 changes of clothes, a Bible she couldn't bring herself to sell, and a ceramic dove that had been her mother's. Everything else had gone to pay for the tickets. The platform was a chaos of steam and shouting. Clara stood apart from the crowd, suddenly aware of how she must look. Her dress, once blue, had faded to the color of dishwater. Her hair, hastily pinned that morning, had come loose during the journey, She'd used her last bit of soap 3 days ago, and somewhere in this crowd was Elias Hawthorne, looking for a bride who could cook. She scanned the faces, cowboys with sun-weathered skin, merchants in dusty suits, women who walked with purpose and clean skirts. Then she saw him, and knew instantly it was him. Not because he was handsome, he wasn't, not in any conventional way, but because he stood apart like she did, comfortable in his isolation. He was tall, lean in the way of men who worked more than they ate. His clothes were clean but worn, his hat pulled low over dark hair that needed cutting. When their eyes met across the platform, he didn't smile, didn't wave, just started walking toward her with the measured gait of a man who'd learned not to rush toward anything. "Mrs. Morrison?" His voice was deeper than she'd expected, roughened by dust or disuse. She nodded, unable to trust her own voice just yet. His eyes, gray as winter sky, moved over her. Then to the children. Emma had woken and was staring at him with the fearless curiosity of the very young. Samuel had pressed himself so tightly against Clara's leg she could feel his heartbeat through her skirts. "These your young ones?" "Yes, sir. Emma's 4. Samuel's 3. They're good children. Quiet." The words tumbled out too fast. "I can cook, Mr. Hawthorne. Whatever you need. Bread, stew, preserves if you have fruit. I can make a meal from almost nothing. And cleaning. I kept a spotless house back in—" "Long ride to the ranch," he interrupted. "Not harsh, exactly, but final. Best get moving if we want to make it before dark." He turned without waiting for a response, clearly expecting her to follow. Clara hoisted Emma higher, took Samuel's hand, and did just that. What else was there to do? The wagon waited at the edge of town, as weathered as everything else in this place. 2 horses stood patient in the traces, swishing their tails at flies. Elias loaded her carpet bag without comment, then stood awkwardly by the wagon's side. It took Clara a moment to realize he was waiting to help her up. Thomas had never— She pushed the thought away and accepted his hand. It was calloused and hard as leather, but his grip was careful, as if he was afraid she might break. The ride stretched endless before them. The town fell away quickly, replaced by nothing, just grass, brown and gold and burnt orange, moving like water in the wind. The sky pressed down, bigger than Clara had ever seen it, empty of everything but a few wheeling hawks. Samuel fell asleep almost instantly, lulled by the wagon's rhythm. Emma stayed awake, those bright eyes taking in everything. Elias drove in silence, his profile carved from stone. "Is it far?" Clara finally asked when the silence grew too heavy. "Some." She waited, but he offered nothing more. In the distance, she could see cattle, small black dots against the brown. Her new life, scattered across this foreign landscape. The sun was bleeding red across the horizon when structures finally appeared. A barn, listing slightly to the left, a couple of outbuildings that might have been sheds or coops, and a house, if it could be called that. Single story, made of rough boards that had weathered to gray. A chimney poked from one end, and what might have been a porch sagged across the front. "Home," Elias said, and Clara couldn't tell if the word held irony or simple fact. He helped them down with the same careful efficiency, then began unloading. Clara stood in the yard, dirt packed hard as stone, and tried to see it as home, tried to see past the isolation, the foreignness, the complete absence of anything familiar. "Mama, I need the privy," Samuel whispered. "It's around back," Elias said without looking up. "Watch for snakes." Snakes, of course. Clara led Samuel behind the house, Emma heavy in her arms. The privy was there, functional if nothing else. She stood guard while Samuel did his business, scanning the ground for anything that might slither. When they returned, Elias had carried her bag inside. The door stood open, an invitation or a surrender. She wasn't sure which. Clara stepped across the threshold and into her new life. The inside was worse and better than she'd expected. One main room served as kitchen and living space, with a stove that had seen better decades and a table scarred by years of use. 2 doors led off, bedrooms, She assumed. The floor was wood. At least not dirt. And it was clean, in the way of places that haven't been lived in enough to get truly dirty. "You and the young ones can take the back room," Elias said from the doorway. "I'll bunk in the barn." "The barn? But—" "Got a cot out there. Use it during calving season anyway." He shifted, uncomfortable with even this much conversation. "There's beans and cornbread from yesterday in that pot. Water in the barrel. Pumps outside if you need more." He turned to go, then paused. "I need to say this plain. Mrs. Morrison, I need help here. Someone who can cook and keep house. That's all. You do that. You and your young ones will have a roof and food. But that's the extent of it." "We understand each other?" Clara met his eyes steadily. "Yes, Mr. Hawthorne. We understand each other perfectly." He nodded once and left. Clara stood in the strange kitchen, listening to his boots fade across the yard. Emma squirmed to be put down, and Clara set her on the floor. The little girl immediately began exploring, running her hands along the rough walls. "Is this the castle, Mama?" Samuel asked. Clara looked around at the bare room, the simple furniture, the window that showed nothing but endless grass and darkening sky. She thought of the man who'd brought them here, who offered shelter but slept in a barn to avoid them. She thought of the pride she'd swallowed and the pride she'd yet to swallow. "Yes, my love," she said finally. "This is the castle." That night, she made beds from straw and what blankets she could find. The children fell asleep quickly, exhausted by the journey and the strangeness of it all. Clara sat by the window, watching stars emerge in a sky so vast it made her dizzy. Somewhere out there, Elias Hawthorne was settling into his barn cot, probably relieved to have his obligation filled. A cook and housekeeper acquired, like buying a new plow or horse. She pressed her hand against the cool glass. "We survived today," she whispered to the stars, to her sleeping children, to herself. "We survived today." It was enough. It had to be. The rooster's crow came before dawn, sharp as a blade through the thin walls. Clara had been awake for an hour already, lying still so as not to disturb the children. Emma's breath wheezed slightly, the dust from yesterday's journey settling in her lungs. Samuel had crawled between them during the night, seeking warmth that the single blanket couldn't provide. She rose carefully, bare feet finding the cold floor. Her dress from yesterday would have to do. The other was for Sundays, if such things existed out here. The main room was gray with pre-dawn light, and through the window, she could see a figure moving near the barn. Elias, already at work. The stove was a creature unto itself, all iron temperament and mysterious drafts. Clara had cooked on worse, but never one so foreign. She found matches, kindling, a few larger pieces of wood stacked neat beside it. The first match died immediately. The second caught but wouldn't spread. By the fifth, she was muttering prayers her mother would have been scandalized to hear. Finally, smoke began to curl. Then actual flame. She'd found flour, lard, a precious small sack of coffee, salt pork that had seen better days. No eggs. She'd need to locate the chickens, if there were any. No milk either, but she could make biscuits. Render the pork for its fat. Make do, making do. If it were a skill that could be taught in schools, she'd have a diploma framed on the wall. The coffee was weak. She'd stretched it far as she dared. But hot. The biscuits were heavier than she'd like, but they'd fill bellies. The salt pork sizzled, filling the kitchen with a smell that made her stomach clench with hunger. When had she last eaten? Yesterday morning? The day before? "Mama?" Emma stood in the doorway, rubbing her eyes. "Where are we?" "Home, sweetheart. Come here." She settled Emma at the table, then fetched Samuel, who was still sleep-warm and confused. They ate in silence, the children still too drowsy for questions. Clara saved half her portion, wrapping it in a cloth. Old habits. The door opened without warning, and Elias filled the frame, bringing the smell of horses and morning cold. His eyes went to the table, the steaming coffee, the empty plates. "You're up early." "Yes, sir." She rose quickly, reaching for the coffee pot. "I'll get you." "I can get my own." but he sat anyway, folding his long frame into a chair that creaked under his weight. Clara served him despite his words, noticed how he wrapped his hands around the cup like it was something precious. He ate methodically, without compliment or complaint. The children watched him with the wary fascination they'd shown toward the barn cats back home. When he finished, he pushed back from the table. "I'll be working the east pasture today. There's a rifle in the corner there, loaded. You know how to use it?" Clara's hand stilled on the plate she was washing. "No, sir," he grunted. "I'll show you later. Don't go wandering. Rattlers are bad this time of year." And he was gone, leaving Clara with a kitchen full of dirty dishes and a loaded gun she was afraid to touch. The day stretched before her like an accusation. She'd promised she could keep house, but this house seemed to resist her efforts. The water from the pump came up rusty and had to sit before use. The floors, which had looked clean in yesterday's dimness, showed years of ground-in dirt when the sun hit them. The windows were hazed with dust and what might have been decades of grease. She started with what she knew. Water heated on the stove. Strong lye soap she found beneath the sink. Rags torn from her petticoat when nothing else presented itself. Emma helped where she could, carrying small buckets, wiping surfaces her mother had already cleaned. Samuel investigated every corner, returning with reports of spiders, dead beetles, and something he insisted was a dragon but was probably just a lizard. By noon, her hands were raw, her back screaming, but the kitchen looked like a place where food could be safely prepared. She'd found the root cellar, a horror of cobwebs and mysterious jars, and retrieved potatoes that weren't too sprouted, onions that might survive another week. There was a barrel of salt beef, hard as leather but edible if boiled long enough. She started stew for dinner, using skills learned in leaner times. A little flour to thicken the water, salt and what herbs she could identify from the neglected garden plot she'd discovered. It would be thin, but it would be hot. The children napped on the floor. She hadn't tackled the bedrooms yet, and Clara allowed herself a moment at the table. Just a moment. Her eyes closed of their own accord. The coughing woke her. Not gentle, not the clearing of a throat. Emma's cough, deep and rattling. The kind that brought blood if it went on too long. "Shh, baby, Mama's here." She gathered Emma up, felt the heat radiating from the small body. Not severe, not yet, but fever nonetheless. She needed willow bark, or at least cool water. The pump water was still settling in the bucket, filmed with rust. She wet another strip of petticoat, bathed Emma's face, her neck, her tiny wrists, where the pulse fluttered like a trapped bird. "Samuel, sweetheart, I need you to be brave. Watch your sister. Mama needs to get water." The pump handle was stiff, fighting her with every stroke. The water that finally came ran clearer, and she filled the bucket, arms trembling with effort. Back inside, she set water to boil, tore more fabric for compresses. There had to be medicine somewhere. Thomas had kept a bottle for his horses. Surely a rancher would have something. She searched cupboards, found bottles of mysterious liquids, most unlabeled. One smelled like turpentine. Another might have been whiskey, long-turned. Nothing she dared give a child. Emma's cough worsened as the afternoon wore on. The fever stayed low but steady, and Clara found herself bargaining with God, promising things she had no way to deliver. She'd done this dance before, in drafty tenements, in rooms where the cold crept through walls thin as paper. But here, in this endless space, it felt different. More alone. The sun was sinking when Elias returned. Clara heard the horse first, then boots on the porch. She was on the floor with Emma, had been for the last hour, singing soft songs and bathing the child's face. He took in the scene with one glance. Without a word, he strode to a high shelf she hadn't been able to reach, pulled down a cloth bag. "Feverfew," he said shortly, "and willow bark. Make a tea, not too strong." His hands, as he showed her the proportions, were steady and sure. This was familiar territory for him. Then, medicine made from plants, illness treated far from any doctor. She gets sick often? When the weather changes, or when she's tired. Clara didn't add the rest, when she was hungry. when they'd slept in the cold, when the worry in Clara's voice made her anxious. He nodded, then surprised her by settling his large frame on the floor nearby. Not close enough to crowd, but present, Samuel, who'd been watching from the corner, crept closer. "You ranch cattle?" The boy's voice was whisper-thin. "I do. We had a cow once, before Papa died." Clara's hand stilled on the compress. They never talked about before. About Thomas. But children didn't know the rules about such things. "That's so?" Elias's voice was neutral. "Careful. Papa hit her and she stopped giving milk." The silence stretched. Horrible and complete. Clara waited for questions, for judgment, for the careful distance that always came after such revelations. But Elias just reached into his pocket, pulled out a piece of wood and a small knife. "You know what this is going to be?" he asked Samuel. The boy shook his head, transfixed. "A horse. See? This here's going to be the head." He carved with slow, deliberate strokes, shavings curling to the floor. Samuel inched closer, and soon was sitting right beside him, watching every movement. Clara returned to Emma, but found herself watching too. The quiet rhythm of the knife, the way Elias's hands transformed rough wood into something almost alive. "My brother liked to whittle," he said after a while, not looking up. "Could make birds so real you'd expect them to fly." "Where is he now?" Samuel asked with a child's directness. "Gone." The word fell heavy. "War took him." Clara remembered the scar she'd glimpsed, wondered what else the war had taken, but he was already moving past it, showing Samuel how to see the shape hiding in the wood. Emma's fever broke near midnight. Clara felt it happen, the sudden coolness of skin that had been burning, the easier breath. She'd been dozing in the chair she'd pulled close, Emma in her arms, and the change woke her instantly. Elias was still there, though Samuel had long since fallen asleep on the floor beside him. The carved horse was nearly finished, delicate for something made with such large hands. He looked up when Clara stirred. "Fever's gone," she whispered. He nodded, began to rise. "I'll leave you be, then." "Mr. Hawthorne, Elias." His name felt strange on her tongue. "Thank you." He paused at the door. "She's a strong one, like her mother." Before Clara could respond, he was gone, footsteps fading toward the barn. She looked down at Emma, peaceful now in sleep, then at Samuel curled on the floor where Elias had been sitting. The carved horse stood guard beside him, nearly complete. She should move Samuel to bed, should try to sleep herself. Tomorrow would bring more work, it always did, but for now, she sat in the quiet kitchen, holding her daughter, and thought about a man who carried medicine for other people's children, who carved horses with hands that could have done violence instead. The stove had burned low, just embers now, but the room still held warmth. Outside, wind moved through grass with a sound like water, like whispers, like promises no one was brave enough to make. Clara closed her eyes and let herself believe, just for a moment, that they might survive this too. Spring came slowly to the prairie, creeping in with tiny green shoots that pushed through winter-dead grass. Clara discovered them one morning while drawing water, these small promises that the world wasn't entirely brown and gray. She knelt right there by the pump, her skirts soaking up mud, and touched one gentle finger to a leaf no bigger than Emma's thumbnail. "What you doing, Mama?" Samuel appeared beside her. The carved horse clutched in one perpetually dirty fist. "Looking at miracles?" she said, then laughed at herself. When had she become so fanciful? But the garden called to something deep in her bones. Behind the house, she'd found the remains of what must have been a kitchen plot, rows still barely visible beneath the weeds. A fence that had fallen more than it stood. Someone had loved this space once. Someone had coaxed life from this unforgiving ground. She started small. A bucket of water here, pulled weeds there. The children helped when they could. Emma sorting rocks into piles, Samuel digging holes that were rarely where Clara needed them. But it was something to do besides scrub and cook and wait for Elias to return each evening. He noticed, of course, said nothing. But she found a hoe propped against the porch one morning, its blade newly sharpened. A week later, a packet of seeds appeared on the kitchen table. Carrots, beans, squash. No note, just possibilities wrapped in brown paper. The work was hard. Harder than keeping house. Harder than anything she'd done in the city. The soil fought her, baked hard as brick. The wind stole her seeds, scattered them like wishes. The sun burned her fair skin until it peeled, leaving her nose perpetually pink despite the bonnet she'd fashioned from a flour sack. But slowly, impossibly, things began to grow. The first green shoots brought her to tears. She sat in the dirt, Emma in her lap, Samuel dancing around them, and cried for the sheer wonder of creating something from nothing. When Elias found her there, she expected mockery. Instead, he crouched beside them, studied the tiny plants with the same intensity he brought to reading weather signs. "Might want to stake those beans come June," was all he said. But that night at dinner, she caught him looking at her, really looking, not the quick glances he usually allowed himself. There was something in his expression she couldn't name, something that made her touch her ruined hair self-consciously. The days fell into rhythm. Up before dawn to start the stove, breakfast ready when Elias came in from checking the stock. He'd eat quickly, efficiently, but had taken to lingering over his coffee. Sometimes Samuel would show him things, a feather, a strange rock, the horse carving that was now missing an ear from being loved too hard. Elias would examine each treasure seriously, offering comments that made Samuel glow. Emma, shyer, would watch from Clara's side. But one morning she approached him with a picture she'd drawn in the dirt with a stick, and Clara held her breath. Elias studied it with the same gravity he gave Samuel's offerings. "That's a fine cow," he said finally. "It's a dragon," Emma whispered. "Ah, I see it now. The wings." Emma beamed, and something inside Clara's chest loosened, like a fist learning to open. She was hanging wash when it happened. A simple thing. Her foot caught in a rabbit hole hidden by grass, and she went down hard. The basket of wet clothes flew, sheets landing in the dirt she'd have to wash again. But it was her ankle that concerned her, already swelling, pain sharp as glass when she tried to stand. She sat there in the dirt, fury and frustration warring with tears. The children were napping. Thank God. But dinner needed cooking. Water needed hauling. And she couldn't even stand. That's how Elias found her an hour later. Having come back early for reasons he didn't explain, she'd managed to drag herself in the washing to the porch, but no further. "Don't," she said when he moved toward her. "I can manage." He ignored her, crouching to examine her ankle with those careful hands. His touch was clinical, impersonal, but heat flooded her face anyway. "Not broken," he announced. "But you won't be walking on it for a few days. I have to. The children need a mother who doesn't make an injury worse being stubborn." He stood, decision made. "I'll carry you inside." "Absolutely not. I can." But he was already scooping her up, one arm behind her back, another under her knees. She'd forgotten what it felt like to be lifted, to be held. Thomas had been a small man, mean-spirited in body as well as soul. Elias carried her like she weighed nothing, like it was no more effort than carrying the washing. "You're being ridiculous," she informed him, but her arms had gone around his neck of their own accord. "Probably," he agreed. Inside. He set her carefully in a chair, then surprised her by starting to remove her boot. She jerked back. "I can manage from here." He sat back on his heels, looking up at her with those unreadable gray eyes. "Clara," her name on his lips stopped her protest. "You've been managing alone for a long time, I know that, but you're here now. My responsibility." The word stung, though she knew he hadn't meant it to. Responsibility. Like the cattle, like keeping the fences mended. He must have seen something in her face because he sighed, ran a hand through his hair. "That came out wrong. I mean, we're supposed to help each other. That's what this is, isn't it?" She wanted to ask what this was, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, She nodded. Let him ease off her boot. Wrap her ankle with strips of clean cloth. His hands were gentle, so at odds with their calluses and scars. That evening was different. Elias cooked. Badly. Beans scorched on the bottom. Cornbread that could have served as a weapon. But he'd tried. And the children found his efforts hilarious. Even Emma giggled when he served the cornbread with a hammer beside it, just in case. After the children were abed, he helped Clara to the porch. The sunset was painting the sky in shades of rose and gold, and the evening air was soft with spring warmth. "I'm not good at this," he said suddenly. "Cooking?" I noticed. A smile ghosted across his face. "That too, but I meant talking, being around people. It's been just me for 3 years. 3 years, since his wife died." She calculated. She wanted to ask about her, this woman who'd shared his bed and his life, but the question felt too large for the fragile peace between them. "You're doing fine," she said instead. "The children adore you. They're easy to like." He paused. "Their mother, too." Heat that had nothing to do with the warm evening crept up her neck. She looked away, at the garden where tiny green things pushed toward the sky. "I should tell you," she said quietly, "about their father, about why you don't owe me your past. Clara. But you should know, he wasn't a good man when he died. I thought I was relieved. What kind of woman is relieved when? The kind who survived." His voice was fierce suddenly. "The kind who got her babies to safety. Don't apologize for that. Not to me, not to anyone." She did cry then, silent tears that came from some deep well she'd kept covered. He didn't try to comfort her, didn't move closer or away, just sat there, solid as the house itself, while she let years of fear and shame leak out onto her cheeks. When she was done, wrung out like the washing, he spoke again. "My wife, Sarah, she was delicate, like those china dolls in the store windows. Beautiful and fragile, and I was always afraid I'd break her just by breathing wrong. When the fever took her, I thought maybe it was my fault. Maybe I'd brought too much roughness into her life." Clara thought of his gentle hands on her ankle, the way he'd carved that horse for Samuel. "You're not rough." "No." He looked at his hands like they belonged to someone else. "The war made me different, did things that don't wash off." Sarah tried to understand, but how could she? How could anyone who wasn't there? "We all carry things," Clara said softly. "Some visible, some not." He looked at her then, really looked, and she saw the moment he understood, that she knew about carrying darkness, about waking at night with the weight of it on your chest. Different battles, same scars. "Your ankles should be better in a few days," he said, standing abruptly. "I'll help with the heavy work until then." She wanted to call him back, to say something about the shift she felt between them, but he was already walking toward the barn, shoulders set against the growing dark. That night, she lay awake thinking about fragile wives and rough hands, about the space between responsibility and something more. Outside her window, an owl called, lonely in the vast night. But when it called again, another answered, and the darkness didn't seem quite so endless anymore. The garden grew, and with it, something neither of them had words for yet. The storm came out of nowhere, as storms on the prairie often did. Clara had just tucked the children into bed when the first gust hit the house, rattling windows in their frames. Within minutes, the wind was howling like a living thing, throwing dirt and debris against the walls. She checked the windows, made sure the door was barred. The lamp flame danced wildly despite the glass chimney, throwing shadows that seemed to reach and grasp. Emma whimpered from the bedroom, and Clara went to comfort her. Samuel already sitting up wide-eyed in the dark. "Just wind, my loves. We're safe inside." Thunder cracked overhead, so loud it seemed to split the sky. Emma shrieked, burrowing into Clara's arms. Even Samuel, who tried so hard to be brave, pressed close against her side. Another sound, different from the storm. The door shaking in its frame, but rhythmically, like someone, "Clara! Elias!" She flew to the door, fighting the wind to lift the bar. He burst in with a spray of rain and dust, shoving the door closed behind him. "Barn roof's coming off," he shouted over the storm. "Horses are panicking. I need—" A crash from the bedroom. The window had blown in. Glass scattering across the floor. The children screamed, and Clara's world narrowed to them, getting them away from the glass, from the wind now tearing through the house. "Get them to the root cellar," Elias ordered, already moving to block the window with the mattress. "Now!" She'd never been in the cellar at night. It was black as pitch, smelling of earth and old vegetables. The children clung to her, Emma sobbing, Samuel trying not to. Above them, the house groaned and shrieked. "What if it falls?" Samuel whispered. "It won't," Clara said firmly, though she wasn't sure. "Mister, Elias built it strong." Time stretched strange in the darkness. The storm raged overhead, and Clara sang every song she knew, told every story she could remember. Her voice was hoarse by the time the wind began to die, the thunder rolling away toward the horizon. "Stay here," she told the children, though everything in her wanted to keep them close. "I'll just check." She pushed open the cellar door to devastation. The kitchen window was gone, rain and dirt coating everything. Branches from trees she hadn't even known were nearby lay across the floor. And in the middle of it all stood Elias, blood running down his face from a gash on his forehead. "You're hurt." She was across the room before she thought, reaching for him. "Flying glass. It's not deep." But he swayed slightly, and she caught his arm. Sit down before you fall down." For once he didn't argue, sinking into a chair while she fetched what medical supplies she could find in the chaos. The children crept up from the cellar, huddling in the doorway. "Is Mr. Elias gonna die?" Emma whispered. "No, sweetheart. He just needs some tending." Clara's hands were steady as she cleaned the wound, though her heart hammered against her ribs. So much blood. Head wounds always bled, she reminded herself. Elias sat still under her ministrations, but she could feel the tension in him, coiled tight as spring steel. When she had to pick out a shard of glass, his hand shot out, gripping her wrist. "Sorry," he muttered, releasing her immediately. "It's all right." She kept her voice soft, the way she did with spooked animals. "Almost done." When the wound was cleaned and wrapped, she sat back, suddenly aware of how close they were. His face was pale beneath the sunburn, a day's growth of beard roughening his jaw. This near, she could see the gold flecks in his gray eyes, the way his lashes were darker than his hair. "Thank you," he said quietly. "It's nothing. After what you— Not just for this." His hand moved, possibly to gesture at his bandaged head, but instead, it covered hers where it rested on the table. "For all of it, the house feels different, alive again." She turned her hand palm up beneath his, their fingers not quite intertwining but considering it. The space between them hummed with possibility. "Mama?" Samuel's voice broke the moment. "I'm scared." Clara pulled back, the loss of Elias's warmth immediate. "Come here, both of you." The children ran to her, and she gathered them close. Elias stood, surveying the damage. "I'll board up the window. Try to get things weather-tight. Tomorrow we'll go to town for glass." "We?" The word slipped out before she could stop it. He paused. "If you're willing. Need supplies anyway. And the children might like to see something besides prairie. A trip to town. Together. Like a real family." The thought was dangerous in its sweetness. The cleanup took hours. Elias boarded the window while Clara swept glass, mopped water, tried to salvage what she could. The children helped, picking up small branches, staying close. By the time they finished, dawn was breaking gray and unwelcoming. "You should rest," Clara told Elias. He looked haggard, the bandage spotted with blood. "Animals need tending." "Then I'll help." He started to protest, saw her face, and nodded instead. They left the children with strict instructions to stay inside, and ventured out into the storm's aftermath. The barn had indeed lost part of its roof. One of the horses had a gash on its flank from flying debris. Chickens were scattered, some probably gone for good, but they were alive. All of them. And that was its own miracle. They worked in companionable silence, her following his lead. When the injured horse shied from him, Clara stepped forward on instinct, humming low in her throat. The animal calmed. Let her stroke its neck while Elias tended the wound. "You have a way with them," he observed. "My father kept horses, before he lost everything to drink." She hadn't meant to say that, but the words came easier now, here in the damaged barn with morning light slanting through the gaps. "Seems like drink takes a lot of men," Elias said carefully, "and meanness takes the rest." He looked at her sharply, but she was watching the horse, fingers gentle on its mane. "I'd never—" he started, then stopped. "I need you to know. I'd never raise a hand. Not to you, not to the children, not ever." "I know," she said simply, and realized she did. Had known maybe from that first night when he'd carved a horse for Samuel instead of sending them all to bed hungry. They finished with the animals and headed back to the house. At the porch, Elias caught her arm gently. "Clara, last night, when I couldn't find you at first, when I thought—" He struggled with words, this man who spoke so sparingly. "Don't scare me like that again." Before she could respond, he was walking away, shoulders set in that way she was beginning to recognize as his armor against feeling too much. That night, she made a pallet on the kitchen floor for the children. Their room was too damaged to use. Elias had reluctantly agreed to sleep in the main house instead of the roofless barn. She gave him her bed, ignored his protests, and made her own pallet near the children. But sleep wouldn't come. Every creak of the house made her heart race. Every whisper of wind brought back the storm's fury. She must have made some sound because suddenly Elias was there, crouching beside her in the darkness. "Can't sleep," she shook her head, not trusting her voice. "Come on," he said, offering his hand. "Let's look at the stars." She shouldn't. The children were right there. Propriety, reputation, a dozen reasons to stay on her pallet. But she took his hand anyway. Let him lead her to the porch. The night sky was crystal clear, washed clean by the storm. Stars spread horizon to horizon, more than she'd ever seen in the city. They sat on the steps, close but not touching, and breathed in the cool air. "After Sarah died," Elias said quietly, "I used to come out here every night. Couldn't stand being in the house. Too many memories, too much silence. And now the house sounds like life again. Children laughing, you singing when you think I'm not listening, even the arguments over vegetables." A small smile touched his lips. I'd forgotten what that was like. Clara pulled her shawl tighter. "I never thanked you properly, for taking us in, for being kind when you didn't have to be. You've more than earned your keep." "That's not what I mean." She turned to face him. "You gave us hope. Do you understand what that means? To have nothing, no one, and then suddenly—" Her voice broke. He shifted closer, and somehow she was in his arms, her face pressed against his shoulder. He smelled of soap and horse and something uniquely him. His hand came up to cradle the back of her head, hesitant at first, then sure. "Clara," he whispered into her hair. "Sweet Clara." She pulled back just enough to see his face in the starlight. His eyes were dark, questioning. In answer, she brought her hand up to his cheek, felt the roughness of his beard, the warmth of his skin. The kiss was inevitable as sunrise. Soft at first, careful, as if they might break something precious. Then deeper, hungrier, years of loneliness and want condensing into this one perfect moment. His hands framed her face like she was something holy, and she thought her heart might burst from the tenderness of it. When they pulled apart, both breathing unsteadily, he rested his forehead against hers. "I don't know how to do this right," he confessed. "Neither do I." She laughed softly, wonderingly. "But maybe we can learn together." "I'd like that," he said, and kissed her again under the vast prairie sky, while inside the house their cobbled-together family slept safe and whole. and the stars bore witness to the beginning of something that had been building since a tired woman stepped off a train with everything to lose and nothing to offer but hope. The days after the storm were different, fuller somehow, charged with unspoken promise. Elias still left early for the fields, but his goodbye lingered. A touch on her shoulder, fingers brushing hers as she handed him his coffee. Clara found herself humming as she worked, stealing glances at the door, waiting for his return. They hadn't kissed again, in daylight, with the children underfoot and chores demanding attention. That night under the stars seemed almost a dream, but the awareness between them was constant now, electric as the storm that had brought down their walls, literal and otherwise. "Mama, you're smiling at the bread," Samuel observed one morning. "Am I?" She felt heat rise in her cheeks. "Well, it's good bread." Emma, more perceptive, watched with knowing eyes too old for her years. "Mister." Elias smiled at breakfast too, at his eggs. Clara busied herself with the washing, but her mind wandered. She'd been married before, had known a man's touch, though never with tenderness, never with joy. This feeling, this anticipation that made her stomach flutter like a girl's, was entirely new, frightening in its intensity. The trip to town came 3 days later. Elias helped her onto the wagon seat with careful hands, lifting the children into the back. The gesture was practical, necessary, but Clara felt the imprint of his fingers long after he'd let go. Perdition Creek looked different in daylight, less hostile than her memory of that first day. Still rough, still unwelcoming to strangers, but she wasn't a stranger anymore. She was the woman living at the Hawthorne place, and that carried a kind of weight. At the general store, Elias conducted business with his usual economy of words: glass for the window, nails, flour, and, surprising her, a length of blue calico. "For the children," he said gruffly when the shopkeeper's wife raised an eyebrow. "Their clothes are worn through." But his eyes found Clara's when he said it, and she knew the fabric was meant for her. Blue, like the dress she'd worn faded to nothing, like the sky on a clear day, like Hope, the shopkeeper's wife, Mrs. Garrett, studied Clara with sharp interest. "You're the widow from back east." "Yes, ma'am." The woman's gaze traveled from Clara to Elias, who was loading supplies, then to the children playing by the pickle barrel. "My Henry says Hawthorne's been different lately. Says he actually spoke a whole sentence at the lumber mill last week." Clara didn't know how to respond to that, but Mrs. Garrett wasn't done. "That man's been walking around half dead since Sarah passed. Good to see life back in him." She leaned closer, voice dropping. "You be careful, though. Folks talk in a town this small. Widow woman, single man, children underfoot. Appearances matter." The words stung, but Clara kept her chin high. "Mister, Hawthorne has been nothing but proper." "I'm sure he has." "Mrs." Garrett's smile was knowing. "Just remember, proper's got different meanings depending on who's watching." They left town under a cloud despite the sunshine. Elias must have sensed her mood because he took a longer route home, through a meadow where wildflowers bloomed in defiant color. "Emma, look." Samuel pointed at a butterfly, orange and black against the purple blossoms. "Can we pick some, Mama?" Emma asked. Elias stopped the wagon without being asked, while the children gathered flowers. He helped Clara down, his hands lingering on her waist. "What did Mrs. Garrett say?" Clara looked away. "Nothing of importance." "Clara," just her name, but weighted with concern. "She warned me about appearances, about what people are saying." His jaw tightened. "Let them talk. It's not that simple. If people think, if they decide I'm not respectable, it won't be just me who suffers. The children would suffer more without you here." He turned her to face him, gentle but insistent. "I won't let anyone hurt you. Any of you. You can't fight the whole town. Elias, watch me." The fierce protectiveness in his voice made her throat tight, but she'd learned the hard way that one man's protection wasn't always enough against the world's judgment. That night, After the children were abed, she found him on the porch, whittling by lamplight. She sat beside him, careful to maintain proper distance. "I've been thinking," she said quietly. "About what Mrs. Garrett said. About appearances." His hand stilled on the wood. "And maybe we should formalize things, for propriety's sake." The words came out rushed, nothing like she'd rehearsed. "A business arrangement, like we agreed, but official, legal." He set down the knife and wood with deliberate care. "You're talking about marriage. For the children. For appearances. Not," she swallowed hard, "not for any other reason." The silence stretched long. Then he stood abruptly, walked to the porch rail. She could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands gripped the wood. "Is that what you want?" His voice was rough. "A business arrangement?" "I don't know what I want," she admitted. "I know what I feel, but I don't know if I can trust it. I've been wrong before." He turned then, and the look in his eyes made her breath catch. "I'm not him. Clara, I'm not your husband, not any man who's hurt you. When I kissed you, please." She stood too, needing to move. "Don't." "Why?" "Because I can't think when you look at me like that. Because I need to be smart this time. Careful. Because my children, our children." The words hung between them like a challenge. "They feel like ours now, don't they?" The truth of it hit her like a physical blow. Somewhere in these weeks of shared meals and scraped knees and bedtime stories, they'd become a unit, a family in all but name. "Yes," she whispered. He crossed to her in 2 strides, caught her hands in his. "Then marry me, not for appearances or arrangements. Because I love you. Because I love them. Because this house has been alive since you walked through the door. And I can't go back to the silence. Elias." "I know I'm not good with words. Know I'm rough around the edges and carry too much darkness. But I promise you this. I'll spend every day trying to deserve you. All of you." She was crying. She realized, tears sliding down her cheeks while he held her hands like anchors. "I'm scared," she admitted. "So am I." He brought her hands to his lips, kissed each palm with a reverent tenderness. "But maybe we can be scared together." The laugh that escaped her was watery but real. "You're proposing out of fear? I'm proposing out of love. The fear's just what made me brave enough to say it." She thought of all the reasons to say no. The short time they'd known each other, the gossip it would fuel, the risk of trusting again. Then she thought of his hands carving a horse for Samuel, his gentle touch on Emma's fevered forehead, the way he looked at her like she was precious beyond measure. "Yes," she said simply. His smile transformed his face, years falling away. Then she was in his arms, being kissed with a thoroughness that made her knees weak. This time there was no hesitation, no careful restraint. This was claiming and being claimed. Promise and possession and joy all tangled together. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against hers. "When?" "Soon," she said, surprising herself with the urgency. "Before I lose my nerve." "Saturday," he decided. "I'll ride to the next town, find a justice who doesn't care about donations to the church building fund." She laughed, giddy with the impossibility of it all. "What will we tell the children?" "The truth, that I want to be their father proper, that I love their mother beyond reason." He kissed her again, quick and fierce. "That we're going to be a real family." The word made her heart sing. Family, not arrangement, not convenience, not survival. Family, later, alone in her bed. She pressed her fingers to her lips, still feeling the burn of his kiss. Through the window, she could see lamplight in the barn where he was finishing the night's work. Saturday, 3 days to become a wife again. But this time, she thought, watching his shadow move across the light, this time she was choosing love instead of escape. This time, she was running toward something instead of away. The garden she'd planted was beginning to bloom. Tiny green promises pushing through soil that had seemed barren. Sometimes, she thought, the most beautiful things grew in the most unlikely places. Sometimes, love found you when you'd stopped believing it existed. Saturday couldn't come soon enough. Saturday dawned gray and drizzling, the sky weeping what Clara refused to let herself feel. She'd been up since before dawn, had already baked bread and mended the small tear in her good dress, the one that wasn't quite as faded, wasn't quite as patched. The blue calico lay folded on her bed, but she couldn't bring herself to cut it. That was for later, for after, for when she was truly Mrs. Hawthorne. "Mama, your hands are shaking," Emma observed as Clara tried to braid the child's hair. "Just excited, sweetheart." "Is Mr. Elias going to be our real papa now?" Samuel asked for the dozenth time. "Yes, love, if that's all right with you." Samuel considered this seriously. "Will he still live in the barn?" Clara felt heat rise in her cheeks. "No, he'll live in the house, like proper families do." The children exchanged glances, some silent communication passing between them. Then Emma reached up, patted Clara's cheek with one small hand. "Don't be scared. Mama, Mr. Elias is nice." From the mouths of babes. Clara hugged them both, drawing strength from their simple faith. Elias appeared in the doorway, and her heart stuttered. He'd shaved, trimmed his hair, wore a clean shirt she'd never seen before. He looked younger, almost uncertain, and devastatingly handsome in his Sunday best. "Ready?" His voice was rough with emotion. She nodded, not trusting her own voice. He helped them all into the wagon, his hands lingering on her waist a moment longer than necessary. The children chattered excitedly in the back, but Clara and Elias rode in silence, the weight of what they were about to do settling between them like a third passenger. The justice of the peace in Millbrook was a thin man with kind eyes who didn't ask questions beyond the legal requirements. His wife stood as witness, smiling at the children who'd gone suddenly shy in the strange house. The ceremony was brief, the words simple. Clara barely heard them over the rushing in her ears. Then Elias was sliding a plain gold band onto her finger, his mother's. He'd told her quietly, and the justice was pronouncing them man and wife. "You may kiss your bride," the justice said with a knowing smile. Elias cupped her face with infinite tenderness, thumbs brushing her cheekbones. The kiss was soft, almost chaste, but Clara felt it to her toes. "Behind them," Samuel giggled while Emma sighed dramatically. "Congratulations, Mr. and Mrs. Hawthorne," the justice's wife said warmly. "May you have many happy years, Mrs. Hawthorne." Clara tested the name in her mind as they rode home. The drizzle had stopped, sun breaking through clouds in golden streams. The children dozed in the back, worn out from excitement, beside her. Elias drove with one hand, the other finding hers on the seat between them. "No regrets?" he asked softly. "No." She laced their fingers together, marveling at the fit. "You?" "Only that I didn't do this sooner. Back home, and it was home now. Truly and legally." Clara busied herself with dinner preparations while Elias saw to the evening chores. The normalcy of it all felt strange, as if such a momentous change should be marked by more than ordinary tasks. The children were unusually subdued during dinner, picking at their food. Finally, Samuel burst out, "Where's Mr. Elias going to sleep?" Clara nearly choked on her bread. Elias calmly took a drink of water before answering, "In the house. Like your mama said, that's what married folks do." "But where?" Samuel persisted. "There's only 2 beds. Clara felt her face flame. They hadn't discussed this, hadn't made plans beyond the ceremony itself. The marriage bed loomed between them, unspoken but suddenly urgent. "We'll work it out," Elias said firmly. "Now finish your vegetables." After dinner, as Clara tucked the children in, Emma caught her hand. "Are you happy, Mama?" "Very happy, sweetheart." "Good." Emma snuggled deeper into her blankets. "You don't cry in your sleep anymore." Clara's throat tightened. She hadn't known the children had heard her night terrors. The dreams where Thomas found them, where they never made it to the train. In the main room, Elias had banked the fire and was standing uncertainly by the door to what had been her room. Their room now. The lamplight cast shadows that made him look younger, vulnerable. "Clara, I want you to know, I don't expect, that is, we can take things slowly." She crossed to him, placed a hand on his chest, could feel his heart racing beneath her palm. "What if I don't want slowly?" His eyes darkened, but still he held back. "You've been through so much, I won't be another man who takes without asking." "Then ask," she whispered. He framed her face with those careful hands. "Clara Hawthorne, my wife, will you share my bed tonight? Will you let me love you as you deserve to be loved?" "Yes," the word came out breathless, eager. What followed was a revelation. Clara had known the marriage bed as duty, as endurance, as something to be survived, but Elias taught her it could be worship. He undressed her slowly, reverently, pressing kisses to each patch of skin revealed. His hands shook as they traced her curves, and when she reached for his shirt buttons, he groaned like a man dying. "So beautiful," he murmured against her throat. "My Clara, my wife." He carried her to the bed, laid her down like something precious, then showed her with lips and tongue and gentle fingers what it meant to be cherished. Clara had to bite her lip to keep from crying out, mindful of the children sleeping nearby. But when he finally joined with her, moving slowly, watching her face for any sign of discomfort, she couldn't hold back the tears. "Am I hurting you?" He stilled immediately, concern replacing passion. "No." She pulled him down for a kiss, tasted her own tears on his lips. "No, you're healing me." They moved together in the darkness, finding rhythms as old as time, as new as their love. Clara discovered she could arch and meet him, could dig her fingers into his back and demand more. Discovered that the sounds he made when she touched him just so were better than music. Discovered that when release swept through her like prairie fire, she wanted to laugh and cry and sing all at once. After, they lay tangled together, skin cooling in the night air. Elias traced lazy patterns on her bare shoulder, and she listened to his heartbeat slow beneath her ear. "I love you," she said, the words easier in darkness. "And I love you." He pressed a kiss to her hair. "Thank you." "For what?" "For taking a chance on a broken-down cowboy. For bringing life back to this place. For giving me a family." She rose up on an elbow to look at him. "We saved each other." "Maybe so." He pulled her down for another kiss, and soon they were discovering each other all over again. Near dawn, Clara woke to find Elias watching her, a soft smile on his face. "What?" she asked sleepily. "Just thinking how I'd like to wake up like this every morning for the rest of my life." "That can be arranged, Mr. Hawthorne." "Good, Mrs. Hawthorne." The new name sent a thrill through her. Not of fear this time, but of belonging, of being claimed and claiming in return. A small voice from the doorway made them both freeze. "Mama, can we come snuggle?" Clara yanked the quilt up to her chin. "Just a minute, sweetheart." Elias was already out of bed, pulling on pants and shirt with admirable speed. He opened the door to find both children waiting, Samuel holding his carved horse, Emma dragging her favorite blanket. "Morning, little ones," he said easily. "How about we let your mama sleep a bit more and I'll make breakfast?" "You can't cook," Samuel pointed out with devastating honesty. "Then you'll have to help me, won't you?" Clara watched from the bed, quilt clutched tight as her husband herded her children toward the kitchen. Their children, she corrected herself. The sound of Samuel's laughter and Emma's careful instructions on egg cracking filled the house. She rose and dressed quickly, then stood in the doorway watching them. Elias had Emma on his shoulders so she could reach the high shelf, while Samuel stirred something on the stove with intense concentration. "Mama!" Emma spotted her first. "We're making wedding breakfast." "I see that." She crossed to them, accepted Elias's kiss without embarrassment. They were married now. This casual intimacy was allowed, expected even. "It's probably terrible," Elias murmured in her ear. "It's perfect," she said, and meant it. They ate burned eggs and undercooked biscuits with jam, and it was the best meal Clara could remember. The children chattered about plans for the day, for the garden, for teaching Elias to cook properly. Outside, sun painted the prairie gold, and inside, their little house was full of laughter and love and the promise of all the mornings to come. This was what she'd traveled so far to find, Clara thought, watching Elias help Samuel cut his biscuit. Not just shelter or survival, but this, a true home, a real family, a love worth every mile of that terrible journey. Mrs. Clara Hawthorne. The name fit perfectly. The fever came to Perdition Creek in late July, carried on the wind like dust. At first, it was just whispers. The Carlson baby sick. 2 of the Murphy children down with it. Then old Mr. Henderson died, and suddenly the whispers became shouts. Clara first heard the real danger at the general store, where she'd gone for salt and flour. The usual chatter died when she entered, conversation stopping mid-word. "Mrs." Garrett's smile was tight. "False. Mrs. Hawthorne. Surprised to see you in town." "We needed supplies," Clara said carefully, aware of the eyes on her. Mrs. Garrett's gaze was sharp as glass. "Funny how the sickness started right after you people arrived. Makes folks wonder." "Wonder what exactly?" Clara kept her voice level, though her heart began to pound. "Oh, nothing specific. Just that sometimes outsiders bring more than themselves to a place." The woman turned to her other customers. "Isn't that right, ladies? Sometimes trouble follows certain kinds of people." The implications hung heavy as storm clouds. Clara completed her purchases in silence, aware of the whispers that followed her to the door. Outside, Elias was loading the wagon, the children helping as best they could. "That was quick," he said, then saw her face. "What happened?" "Nothing. Let's just go home." But he knew her too well now, could read the tension in her shoulders. He helped her onto the seat, his jaw tight. As they drove out of town, Clara noticed how people turned away, how mothers pulled their children inside as they passed. "They're blaming us," she said quietly. "For the fever." Elias's hands tightened on the reins. "Ignorant fools. But if they all believe it, then they're still ignorant fools." He glanced at the children, lowered his voice. "We'll weather this, Clara, like we've weathered everything else." But the weather turned against them too. The heat grew oppressive, the air thick and hard to breathe. The garden Clara had tended so carefully began to wilt despite her best efforts, and the fever crept closer, taking the youngest Olsen boy, then both the minister's daughters. Fear made people cruel. When Clara ventured to town again, no one would sell to her. Mr. Patterson actually shut his store door in her face, calling through the wood that he had nothing for her kind. "What's my kind?" she'd asked, but received no answer. Elias went instead, returning with meager supplies and a dark expression. "They're saying you brought disease from the east, that the children carry sickness in their blood." "That's madness. That's fear." He pulled her close, and she felt the tremor in him. "I should have known this would happen. Should have protected you better." "From what?" "From people's ignorance. You can't fight the wind, Elias." But he tried. When someone left a dead crow on their porch, a warning, a curse, he rode to town and faced down a gathering crowd at the saloon. Clara didn't know what was said, but he came home with split knuckles and a cut lip. "Did you hit someone?" she asked, dabbing at his wounds. "Someone hit me first." His smile was sharp. "But I finished it." The children felt it too. The poisonous atmosphere. Emma's nightmares returned, and Samuel went quiet in that way that meant he was thinking too hard about things no child should consider. "Why don't people like us?" he asked one evening as Clara tucked him in. "People are scared," she said carefully. "When bad things happen, they look for someone to blame. But we didn't make anyone sick. No, sweetheart, we didn't. Then why? Sometimes there is no why. Sometimes people are just wrong. But explanations couldn't ease the growing dread. Every cough from the children made her heart race. Every moment of fatigue sent her checking for fever. She boiled their water twice, washed their clothes until her hands were raw, watched them like a hawk for any sign of illness. Then came the night that changed everything. Clara woke to the smell of smoke, sharp and wrong. She shook Elias awake, already moving toward the children's room. "Fire," was all she said. They moved fast, Elias scooping up Samuel while Clara grabbed Emma. The main room was already filling with smoke, orange light dancing on the walls. The door wouldn't open, barred from outside. "The window!" Elias shouted over the crackling flames. He kicked it out, glass shattering. "Take them! Go!" Clara climbed through, reaching back for the children. Emma first, sobbing in terror. Then Samuel, white-faced but silent. Finally, Elias, coughing from the smoke. They stumbled away from the house, Clara clutching the children while Elias ran for water buckets. But it was too late. The flames had caught the dry wood, racing along the walls like living things. Neighbors appeared, not to help, but to watch. Clara saw their faces in the firelight, some satisfied, some ashamed, none moving to aid. "Let it burn," someone called. "Cleanse the poison out." Clara turned on them then, fury overcoming fear. "You did this. You set fire to a house with children inside. Nobody meant for anyone to get hurt." "Mrs.," Garrett said, not meeting her eyes. "Just wanted you to leave. By murdering us in our beds? Now, see here, Mr. Patterson started. "No, you see." Elias appeared beside Clara. "Ash-streaked and dangerous. You've made your point. We hear you. But if anyone touches my family again, I'll forget I was ever a civilized man. That's not a threat. That's a promise before God." The crowd shifted uneasily. In the distance, the fire bell rang. Too late to matter. Their home collapsed in a shower of sparks, taking everything they'd built together. "Where will we go?" Emma whispered against Clara's neck. "I don't know, baby." "But we'll be together." They spent the night in what was left of the barn, huddled together in the hay. The children finally slept, exhausted by terror. Clara and Elias sat watching the embers of their home glow in the darkness. "I'm so sorry," he said finally. "I brought you here to be safe, and instead, stop." She took his hand, held tight. "This isn't your fault. I promised to protect you. And you did. We're alive. Elias, all of us. That's what matters." Dawn came gray and bitter with smoke, but with it came unexpected hope. An old wagon creaked up the drive, driven by someone Clara didn't recognize. A woman, elderly but straight-backed, with eyes like steel. "You folks the Hawthorns?" Elias stood, wary. "We are. I'm Agnes Miller. Live about 10 miles north." She climbed down, surprisingly spry. "Heard what happened. Came to say it's a damn shame and those fools ought to be ashamed." Clara blinked back sudden tears. One voice of kindness after so much cruelty nearly undid her. "Also came to say I could use help on my place. Got more land than I can manage since my boys went west. You folks need somewhere to stay while you rebuild." "Why?" Elias asked bluntly. "Why help us?" Agnes snorted. "Because I remember what it's like to be the outsider. Came here 40 years ago, German immigrant with babies and no English. People weren't kind then either, but someone helped me when I needed it. Figure it's my turn to pass that on." She turned to Clara. "Besides, that blue ribbon apple pie you brought to the church social last month? Best I've had in years. Woman who can bake like that deserves better than being run out by fools." Clara didn't remember any Agnes Miller from the social, but she remembered the pie, one of her mother's recipes, entered on a whim. She hadn't known anyone had noticed. "We don't have anything left," she said quietly. "Everything burned." "You've got strong backs and willing hands. That's all I need." Agnes looked at the children, her expression softening. "And these little ones could use some fattening up. I've got a milk cow going to waste." It wasn't charity, Clara realized. It was opportunity dressed as kindness, dignity preserved in the offering. "We'll work hard," Elias said. "I know you will." Agnes climbed back onto her wagon. "Follow when you're ready. North Road, white fence. Can't miss it. I'll have breakfast waiting." As the wagon rolled away, Clara felt something ease in her chest. Not everyone in this harsh land was cruel. Not everyone let fear rule them. "We'll come back," Elias said, looking at the ruins of their home. "When things calm down, we'll rebuild." "I know." Clara shifted Emma to her other hip, took Samuel's hand. "But for now, let's go where we're welcome." They walked away from the ashes, toward whatever came next. Behind them, the sun rose over the prairie, painting the sky in shades of hope. And in that light, Clara saw not an ending but a beginning, another chapter in their unlikely love story, written in smoke and kindness and the unbreakable bonds of chosen family. The road north stretched before them, and they took it together. Spring came again to the prairie, painting the world in shades of green and gold. Clara stood in the doorway of their new cabin, one hand resting on her swollen belly, watching Elias teach Samuel how to rope a fence post. Emma sat nearby, carefully tending to a litter of barn kittens, her gentle nature blooming in this place of second chances. Agnes Miller's ranch had been their salvation in more ways than one. The old woman, tough as leather and twice as durable, had taken them in without judgment, given them work and purpose when the world had turned its back. Through the winter months, they'd helped her manage the sprawling property, and in return, she'd given them a corner of land to call their own. "You're building again," she'd said simply when Elias started laying the foundation. "Good. The prairie needs families like yours." The new cabin was smaller than their old home, but built with love in every board. Elias had insisted on stone corners. "Fire won't take us again," and real glass windows that caught the morning light. Clara had sewn curtains from fabric Agnes gifted her, and the children had helped paint the door a cheerful blue. "Mama, look," Samuel called, his lasso actually catching the post for once. "I did it." "Well done, my love," Elias grinned, ruffling the boy's hair. At 7, Samuel was growing like prairie grass, all legs and questions. He called Elias Papa now without hesitation, and the word never failed to light up her husband's eyes. The past year had aged them all in some ways, made them wiser to the world's cruelties, but it had also strengthened them, like metal tested in fire. The fear and hatred of Perdition Creek seemed distant now, though Clara knew Elias still rode that way sometimes, checking on their old land, making sure the message was clear. They would return when they were ready. Some people from town had actually sought them out to apologize. The fever had continued long after they'd gone, proving their innocence to all but the most stubborn Mr. Henderson's widow had even sent a letter, saying she was ashamed of what had been done in grief's name. "The baby's dancing," Clara murmured as the child within her kicked strongly. Elias was beside her in an instant, his hand gentle on her belly. His wonder at this pregnancy, their child, made from love instead of duty or fear, never seemed to fade. "Strong like his mama," he said softly. "Her mama," Clara corrected, as she had every day for months. "We'll see." He kissed her temple, then called to the children. "Come wash up. Lunch is ready." They'd invited Agnes to eat with them, as they did every Sunday. The old woman pretended it was a bother, but Clara always caught her smiling when the children chattered about their week. Today, Emma presented her with a kitten, orange as sunset, with one white paw. "For your mice problem," Emma said seriously. "What mice problem?" Agnes asked. "The one you'll have if you don't take her." Agnes barked a laugh, accepting the kitten with surprising gentleness. "Child's got your spine. Clara, she'll do well in this world." After lunch, they sat on the porch Agnes had helped them build, watching the endless grass ripple in the wind. Samuel was teaching the new kitten to chase a string while Emma read aloud from her primer, another gift from Agnes, who believed fiercely in education. "I've been thinking," Agnes said suddenly, I'm not getting younger. This land needs someone who'll tend it proper when I'm gone." Clara and Elias exchanged glances. Agnes had no living children. Her boys lost to gold rush dreams that never panned out. "What are you saying?" Elias asked carefully. "I'm saying I need to make a will. Saying this place ought to go to people who'll love it right." She looked at the children, her usual stern expression soft. "To family." Clara's eyes filled. "Agnes, don't get weepy on me, girl. It's practical, is all. You've proven yourselves 10 times over. The land should go to those who'll work it with respect. We can accept. You can and you will." Agnes's tone brooked no argument. "Besides, way that baby's growing. You'll need the extra room soon enough." That evening, as they walked Agnes back to her house, the old woman paused at her door. "You know why I really helped you?" she asked quietly. "That day at the church social, I saw how you were with those children. Saw how you made sure they ate before you did. How you watched them like a hawk but let them explore. Reminded me of my own mother. She'd have liked you." She went inside before Clara could respond, but not before pressing a small wooden box into her hands. Inside was a delicate gold locket, tarnished with age. "For the baby," Agnes said gruffly, and closed the door. Back in their own cabin, the children asleep and the night settling soft around them, Clara and Elias sat by their fire. She opened the locket. Inside was a picture of a young Agnes with 2 small boys, their faces bright with laughter. "She's giving us everything," Clara whispered. "She's giving us a chance to give our children everything," Elias corrected. "There's a difference." Clara thought of the journey that had brought them here, the desperate flight from the east, the fear and hunger, the unlikely advertisement that changed everything. She thought of their first home, reduced to ash by hatred, and she thought of this new life, built from kindness and determination and love that grew stronger with each passing day. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked. "Taking us in, all the trouble we brought?" Elias pulled her close, his hand coming to rest on her belly where their child grew. "The only thing I regret is the time I wasted before I kissed you, before I understood that you weren't just saving me. You were teaching me how to live again. We saved each other," Clara said, as she had that night so long ago. "Still do," he murmured against her hair. "Every day." The fire crackled softly, painting shadows on the walls of their new home. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, crops to tend, children to raise, a baby to prepare for. There would be trips to town to face those who'd wronged them, forgiveness to offer or withhold. There would be drought and plenty, sorrow and joy, all the complexities of a life lived fully. But tonight, Clara rested in her husband's arms and felt the deep contentment of a woman who'd found her place. Not just a physical home, though the cabin was dear. Not just safety, though Elias would always provide that. But belonging. To this man, these children, this land that had tested them and found them worthy. "I love you," she said, words that still felt like a miracle. "And I love you," he replied. Forever and then some. Outside, coyotes called to each other across the darkness, and the wind sang its eternal song through the grass. But inside their small cabin on the vast prairie, the Hawthorne family was safe and whole, their love a light against whatever darkness might come. In the end, that's what love was. Not the absence of hardship, but the presence of someone to weather it with. Not a destination, but a journey, taken hand in hand. Not a fairy tale ending, but a real beginning, messy and difficult and absolutely perfect. Clara closed her eyes and listened to Elias's heartbeat, to the settling of their home, to the prairie breathing all around them. And in that quiet moment, she knew with bone-deep certainty they were exactly where they belonged. The mail-order bride had found more than safety in her cowboy's arms. She'd found home. Thank you so much for listening to this story of Clara and Elias on the Wild West Prairie. If you enjoyed their journey of love, survival, and second chances, I'd love to hear from you. Please share in the comments where you're listening from, whether it's during your commute, while relaxing at home, or perhaps on your own adventure somewhere. Don't forget to subscribe to Wild West Campfire for more tales of romance and resilience from the American frontier. And share your thoughts about Clara and Elias's story. What touched your heart? What surprised you? Your feedback helps bring these historical romances to life. Until next time, partners.